Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe Relation Tales. I don't get how some people are so sure of themselves and do whatever they want. A friend said those people are foolish and will face consequences. I kind of agreed, but I made my abuser face the music a bit sooner. That darn jacket. If only I hadn't left it at home, things might have been different. My big truck was ready to go, but my jacket was still at home. The boss wasn't happy, but he gave me a few extra minutes to grab it. I grumbled as I drove, and when I got home, I saw something strange. The boss's car was parked in my driveway, leaving the truck engine running. I hurried through the front door and down the hallway to the bedroom I shared with my wife. As I swung the door open, the room flooded with light, revealing my wife and boss in a compromising position. She was on all fours, oblivious to my presence, while he noticed me immediately. His expression briefly flickered with guilt before he resumed his actions with a grin. With trembling hands, I retrieved my forgotten jacket from the wardrobe. Seething with anger, I shouted at them, "We'll talk later," before storming out. Slamming both the bedroom and front door, I made my way to the cab of the Kenworth truck. As I drove through the suburban streets and onto the freeway, my anger remained unabated. Despite the turmoil, I managed to regain control of my emotions. However, doubts about returning home gnawed at me, careening off the road towards a looming tree trunk. "That's the last thing I remember. I believe he's regaining consciousness," remarked a distant female voice. I struggled fruitlessly to open my eyes. My limbs remained immobile, and sensation eluded my legs. Closer to me, another voice, one I immediately recognized as my wife Diane's, murmured, "Thank heavens." Additional voices chimed in and I sensed hands touching my face. "Good morning, Mr. Hammond. It's good to see you awake again. How are you feeling?" A commanding male voice resonated. Though I attempted to speak, words failed to form. After a tremendous effort, I managed to pry my eyes open. The room was brightly illuminated, and I discerned several figures moving about, though I couldn't distinguish them clearly. "Mr. Hammond," the male voice boomed once more. "Blink if you can hear me." I blinked. "Excellent. Mr. Hammond, you had a bad accident and you're in the hospital now. Don't try to move because you have a lot of broken bones. We put you in a special sleep to help you heal for 2 weeks. Do you get what I'm saying?" "Yeah, I get it," I thought. I blinked again. "Okay, now we have to work on making you better. It will take some time, but we'll help you get better step by step." I was overcome with exhaustion and drowsiness, so I shut my eyes and slipped back into the realm of dreams. Upon reopening my eyes, the passage of time uncertain, my vision cleared. I surveyed my surroundings, noting various tubes connected to my body. Despite this, I managed to turn my head slightly and glimpsed a presence beside me. My wife occupied a chair in the corner, engrossed in a book. Sensing my movement, she swiftly abandoned her reading and rushed to my bedside. "Steve," she began, relief evident in her voice. "I'm relieved to see you awake. I feared we had lost you. How are you feeling?" I found the question somewhat futile. After weeks in a coma, how could I possibly articulate my state? Before I could respond, however, I discovered I still couldn't speak. She tenderly touched my forehead before returning to her seat. Her expression a mix of emotions I couldn't decipher. Was it compassion, anger, sympathy, guilt? I held her gaze until she looked away, confirming my suspicion of guilt. I struggled to make sense of my thoughts, memories of the accident flashing through my mind. Why did I leave the house in such haste? The effort proved overwhelming and I succumbed to unconsciousness once more, aided no doubt by medication dulling my senses. When I next awoke, darkness had enveloped the room and the chair had been replaced by a makeshift cot. Diane lay asleep, covered by a thin hospital blanket. As my thoughts wandered, they gradually coalesced. Recollections flooded back. Picking up my truck from the depot, realizing my jacket was still at home, bursting into my bedroom to find my wife with my company boss. Everything began to make sense. I attempted to speak. "You traitor." I wanted to shout. What emerged from my lips was barely a sound, but it was enough to rouse Diane, who hurried to my side from her cot. I recoiled as she reached for my face, attempting to turn away. I hoped my eyes conveyed the rage I felt. For days, I remained heavily medicated to manage the pain. Beside fracturing both legs, I had also sustained an unexamined back injury. My truck was totaled, but fortunately, a car trailing behind had promptly reported the accident, and an ambulance arrived swiftly. Doctors began outlining the extent of my injuries and the rehabilitation plan ahead. Amidst it all, the constant presence in my room was my deceitful wife, Diane. My ability to speak returned. What should I say to my wife? A member of the nursing staff, seizing a rare moment when Diane slipped out to use the bathroom, remarked that she had never witnessed a more devoted wife. Diane had been by my side since shortly after my admission, steadfastly refusing to leave. I chose not to disillusion her. Once Diane returned and the nurse had departed, I resolved to seek some answers. "How long, Diane?" She turned to me, taken aback. "They suspect you fell asleep at the wheel," she ventured cautiously. "They anticipate your recovery will take several months." "That's not what I'm asking and you know it," I retorted. "I certainly didn't fall asleep at the wheel, but something caused my truck to swerve off the road. Now, what about you and my boss? How long have you been seeing someone else without telling me?" "Steve, I don't want to talk about him now. I love you and only you. I'm focused on helping you get better after your accident." "Well, you might think I'm not grateful for saying this, but the last time I saw you both, it didn't seem like you loved me. And now I realize it wasn't the first time you were together, right?" She didn't need to answer. She looked guilty and avoided my eyes. "So, Diane, how long have you been unfaithful?" "Steve, I really don't want to talk about it. Do you want a divorce then?" "Oh, God, no, Steve. Please trust me when I say I love you and only you. I want to have your children. I want to grow old with you." "That seems unlikely now, Diane. You betrayed our wedding vows. Remember when we promised to be faithful to each other, till death do us part?" "Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you by surviving the crash, but it appears you couldn't wait for my demise anyway. So the prospect of us living together happily ever after seems rather slim, wouldn't you agree?" She recoiled from my harsh words and sank into her chair, crying softly, hands covering her face. "I think you should go home, Diane. You might find me ungrateful for not appreciating your loyalty, but whenever I see you, all I can envision is my boss violating you." She cried louder, seized her small overnight bag, and stumbled out of my room into the hospital corridor. I was left alone, feeling wretched. When a nurse passed by, she immediately remarked on my wife's absence. I chose not to respond, but instead asked her to notify my supervisor at work that I was able to receive visitors. Less than an hour later, he showed up. "I saw the truck, Steve. You're one lucky guy. I can't believe you made it out of there alive." "Yeah, well, thanks for coming, Phil. I've been replaying the accident in my mind for the past few days, even though my memory of it is a bit blurry. Something broke on that truck. It was out of control, Phil. The steering wheel was ripped out of my hands and the whole rig just veered off the road after hitting a bump. Has the truck been inspected yet?" "Nah, word is you fell asleep. Phil, could you go talk to the workshop supervisor, please? Ask him to examine the wreckage and see if he can find anything that might have caused me to swerve off the road." I could tell he wasn't fully convinced, but Phil agreed to speak with the workshop guy. We chatted about various topics until he finally addressed the main issue. "I thought Diane might have been with you. Has she been around?" he asked cautiously. "She just left." "Why do you ask?" "No particular reason, Steve. Just assumed she'd be here. That's it." He looked uncomfortable, and then left. I realized Diane's affair with the boss might not be a secret. The next day, 2 colleagues came to see me. One was George Lambert, who runs the workshop, and with him was Jock McGregor, who represents the workers. They both looked serious. Jock spoke up. "Steve, we have a problem." I brought George to explain. "Your accident was bound to happen, and I've already started checking every truck in the fleet before they go out again. The bosses are mad because lots of deliveries will be late, and some customers might go to another company. Take a look at the workshop log for your rig, Steve." George handed over the oily hardcover logbook for the tractor I damaged. On the last page, filled out on the day of my accident, there was a highlighted note about a broken spring on the front axle. "Turn back to the previous page." I turned the page, and amidst discussions of uneven tire wear, I found an almost identical note about a broken spring leaf. The previous page had the same remark. Going back 3 weeks, I observed that the broken spring was mentioned each time the truck underwent servicing. "Damn it, George, why didn't you replace it?" I exclaimed. "Management wouldn't allow me to hold up the truck. I had a replacement ready in the workshop 2 weeks ago, but they refused to let me take the rig off the road because they were too busy. They kept saying it would be fixed at the next service," George explained. "And nobody thought to inform me about this." I questioned. "I'm sorry, Steve. The boss was convinced it was a minor issue, so it didn't occur to me until the accident." "I'm truly sorry. It's my fault that you're injured," George apologized. "Rubbish," muttered Mac. "They knew the risk and gambled with your life. I contacted our legal team today, and they've assigned Tim Delaney to handle your case. He already has the logbook entries and statements from other drivers. This guy's a real fighter, Steve. We need to tackle this on 2 fronts. Getting you compensated for medical bills, rehab and lost wages, and securing a package for the likelihood that you won't be able to drive professionally again due to your back injury." Mac's direct words shook me. I hadn't even considered the possibility of not returning to work. I lay back in bed, closing my eyes. Don't worry, Steve. Just focus on getting better and moving forward. We're here to support you, Max said, reassuring me. As I watched them leave my hospital room, a tear rolled down my cheek. It felt like I had every reason to feel down. In just a few weeks, I crashed my truck, went into a coma, and now I'm facing the possibility of losing not just my wife, but also my job. The next day, Tim Delaney came into my room with a lot of energy. He was a big guy, probably in his early 40s, towering over 6 feet tall, and looked like he could be a pro basketball player. We talked about the crash, reports from the workshop, and what could happen next. You did 2 years of a business degree, he mentioned. What made you abandon that and switch to truck driving for a living? I grinned. My father was a long-haul truck driver and often took me along during my school years, so it wasn't as drastic a change as it might seem to you. There's another reason. I met a wonderful girl, and we couldn't wait to get married. And no, she wasn't pregnant. We were just deeply in love, and changing careers allowed us to be together. Touching story, Steve, but I've heard rumors that things might not be going well between you two. Damn, am I the last person in the state to find out my wife was cheating with my boss? With your boss, Tim echoed, incredulous. I look forward to tearing him apart in court. I don't really care about him anymore, but I need you to start preparing divorce papers as soon as possible. We don't typically handle divorces, but I'm willing to make an exception in this case. Tim was exceptional. During our brief time together, I grew to trust him deeply. He exuded compassion, energy, and a strong sense of integrity that brought me hope and solace. He meticulously outlined his strategy for my legal action against my employers and assured me of expert advice regarding my separation from Diane. For the first time since the accident, a glimmer of optimism crept into my psyche. Days passed, during which I commenced recovery therapy and underwent medical examinations, including CAT scans to devise a treatment plan for my aching back. When an unexpected visitor entered my room and requested confirmation of my identity, I immediately became vigilant. He gave me a small envelope and looked like he wanted me to sign something. But then he saw all the tubes connected to me and quietly left the room. "Good day, sir," he said softly as he left, disappearing without a trace. I asked a nurse to open the envelope and tell me what was inside. She looked shocked after reading it. "It's a letter from your job saying they're letting you go," she whispered. "How could they do this while you're still in the hospital?" I asked her to call Tim for me and read him the letter. Tim came quickly, looking really mad about the letter. "This letter is going to make that guy pay," he promised. "It means we won't have to fight in court about whether you can keep working. He settled it for us." His cold and calculated treatment of an employee in the hospital recovering from a work-related injury won't earn him any favors either. What began as a typical day on the road to recovery shifted from hopelessness to optimism. Tim had a knack for instilling positivity about the future in me. "Oh, and by the way," he added as he was leaving, "your wife was served with divorce papers today. But she entered my room just after dinner, visibly furious. 'How could you do this to me?' she cried. 'I don't want a divorce. I made a mistake, Steve, a mistake. But I love you and I want us to stay together and work it out.' I came into this confrontation much more prepared. Diane, your way of expressing love is peculiar. It was distressing enough to witness first and the damage you've inflicted on our marriage. Yet, it appears I was the last to know what was truly happening. It's evident now that every time I embarked on a long journey, it signaled another rendezvous with my boss. I previously inquired about the extent of your affair, and you evaded the question. But it's irrelevant now, Diane. You've repeatedly disrespected me and our marriage vows. Have I ever denied you, Steve? Is that your defense?" I asked incredulously. "Honestly, Diane, I expected better from you. How many times have you two been together since my accident?" She averted her gaze and fell silent. I wondered if her silence meant they hadn't been together at all. Could there still be hope? "We've had a solid marriage until now," I reminded her. "Let's not tarnish our good memories with anger and deceit. We'll have to discuss the division of assets eventually. But now isn't the time. Go home, Diane. If he brings you happiness, file for divorce and be with him. But don't expect me to be your life partner anymore. I can't look at you without reliving the moment I caught you with him. There's no way to move past that. Goodbye, Diane. I wish you a happy life." Once more, she left my hospital room in tears. This time, I hoped it was for the last time. Initially, my limbs recovered. I maneuvered around the ward with plaster casts. undergoing multiple therapy sessions daily. However, my back injury was severe, necessitating stabilization with metal plates to fuse several vertebrae, a delicate surgery lasting hours. Subsequent recovery proved grueling, marked by persistent pain until my eventual discharge, relying on a regimen of painkillers. Meanwhile, Tim Delaney pursued legal action aggressively against the transport company, exploring every legal avenue. Despite initial hopes for a pre-trial settlement, I found myself in court as Tim presented his case to a judge. By day's end, witness testimonies overwhelmingly favored Tim, undermining the company's defense. Before the second day began, the company's solicitors sought to settle out of court. "I'm aiming for maximum impact," Tim exclaimed as we entered the negotiation room. "They've lost, and they know it. Now, they're just trying to limit the fallout." Following his promise, Tim made a challenge, insisting on at least $10 million for damages and compensation. He pointed out my ongoing medical bills, constant back pain, and the uncertainty of starting a new career. Surprisingly, even I felt sorry for myself. The negotiation had to finish before the court meeting at 11 a.m., which was good for us. When the defense offered $5 million, Tim looked very unhappy, but he knew we would likely settle for something in between. In the end, he succeeded. He kept pushing until both sides agreed on $8.5 million. I felt relieved. It was the first time I had seen my boss since before the accident. I noticed he was visibly angry about being forced into this situation and couldn't look me in the eye. With the legal stuff sorted out, I went to the depot one last time to say goodbye to my colleagues. I thanked George for his detailed records that showed the company's mistakes and Jock for fighting for my fair treatment. It was time for me to regroup and plan for the future. I chose to relocate to my parents' hometown, where I'd previously studied, and resume my education in hopes of securing an administrative position. I purchased a 2-bedroom apartment near the university and a small hatchback for transportation. Returning to academia was an intriguing experience. I found myself a decade older than most of my peers in the group, but also significantly more motivated. Success became a genuine aspiration. My parents were thrilled with the new arrangement. I made it a point to visit them every weekend, whether it was taking Dad to football games or fishing in the bay occasionally, and we regularly enjoyed meals together at restaurants. Although Diane hadn't signed the divorce papers, she appeared to be handling the mortgage and utilities, so I decided not to push the issue, preferring to avoid conflict in my life. Following Tim Delaney's advice, I allowed him to arrange for a security agency to install several security cameras in our house. Until our divorce was finalized, he believed it prudent to monitor the premises without needing to physically check in. A couple of years later, I graduated with honors. The search for a stable long-term job led me to an accounting firm in the city center specializing in corporate bankruptcy management. Their approach was largely innovative. Instead of immediately resorting to bankruptcy, their primary goal was to assess operations and attempt to restore profitability, sometimes involving sacrifices from creditors. I found this work fulfilling. As part of a small team of seasoned professionals, I conducted forensic examinations of various companies to identify shortcomings and collaborate with key personnel to devise turnaround strategies. It didn't take long for my NAC for pinpointing corporate weaknesses and devising effective solutions to be recognized. At the end-of-year staff function, both the partners and my colleagues acknowledged my contributions, and I was entrusted with leading my own team along with a significant salary increase. When a new task arrived at my desk one morning, I was taken aback. The company in financial distress was none other than my former employer. Recognizing the potential conflict of interest, I promptly called the senior partner and requested to be excused from the case. His response was direct. "Steve, we understand your prior connection with this company, which actually makes you the ideal candidate. Surely you still have former colleagues dependent on the business for their livelihoods, providing you with an additional incentive to help them out of this situation. Moreover, I have faith in your professionalism." My first task was to inform my old boss that our firm had been appointed and that I would be leading the management team. He went on about the perceived injustice of it all, claiming there was no significant issue, just a minor cash flow hiccup that had already been resolved and that our involvement would be a complete waste of time. I politely told him that the court ordered us to intervene and our team had to investigate. I said we'd come with my team at 9 the next morning. I thanked him in advance for cooperating and hung up. When we got there the next day, it was clear they didn't want to help us. The management's response wasn't surprising. They saw us as a reminder of their failure to run their business well. In the morning, I talked with Jock and George over coffee. After discussing with my team at lunch, I made a decision. I went to the boss's office, went in, and suggested it might be easier if he left so we could do our work. At first, he said no, but when he realized I could make him leave, he reluctantly agreed and left looking upset. It took me 2 days to figure out the problem. A young member of our team, a petite blonde with pigtails who appeared no older than 16 and had just graduated from a commercial school, approached me with a ledger from a creditor. This driver is employed by the company and receives regular payment for long-distance trips across the state. However, I've checked and can't find the same truck listed on any of the freight manifests. So, what exactly is it being used for and who is footing the bill? She inquired. Expressing gratitude for her keen observation skills, I requested copies of the invoices. The phenomenon of phantom operators is a classic tactic among transportation companies that utilize subcontracted vehicles. It's typically uncovered when a member of the accounting team never takes time off, diligently attempting to conceal their actions. However, this wasn't the case here. Upon reviewing the invoices, it became evident that every single one had been approved by the boss himself. Summoning the administration manager, I inquired whether the company had provided the boss with a laptop. Absolutely, he replied with enthusiasm. We purchased 4 Dell laptops approximately a year ago, and the boss has the highest-end model among them. I can provide the invoice if you'd like to see it. Internally, I grinned and made a mental note of the boss's computer's serial number. My next step was to contact the local sheriff for assistance. I need to retrieve a company device from a manager's house, and I suspect he won't willingly surrender it. The laptop likely holds crucial information for our investigation into his company, I explained to the sheriff. Though not overly eager, he agreed to pick me up from the depot office in 15 minutes. During our drive, he began questioning me. You used to work for this organization, right? He asked. Yes, I confirmed. Remember that nasty accident? Had to handle the wreckage recovery. You were lucky to make it out alive, son. Yes, indeed. But things tend to work out in the end, I replied. You left your wife when you moved out. That's correct. I responded thoughtfully. Is that guy still involved with her? I wouldn't know, Sheriff. I filed for divorce upon leaving. It's not finalized, but I have no romantic attachments at the moment. And frankly, I don't care who she's with, I explained. I think she spends her nights alone. He visits during the day. He's married with kids and returns home every night. His wife is probably the only one unaware of what's happening, the sheriff remarked. Well, that makes 2 of us, I retorted bitterly. I didn't know what was going on until I caught them in the act. It happened on the day of the accident. We had an agreement with the sheriff that I could ask for the laptop and step in if needed, which turned out to be the case. At first, the person tried to give me an old laptop that wasn't the one we wanted. But when he saw the sheriff coming, he reluctantly gave us the right one, saying he'd get it back in 24 hours. Thinking he might be right, I asked the sheriff to take me back to the office. There, one of my team members started downloading everything from the laptop onto our secure server. This way, if we had to give it back, we'd have a copy, and we could also keep an eye on any new activity. As expected, a young lawyer came to demand the laptop back. We argued at first that it belonged to the company, not his client, but eventually, we agreed to give it to him. The laptop had been carefully returned to its case before the lawyer's arrival, giving the impression it hadn't been tampered with by myself or my team. The lawyer, with a sense of victory, eagerly took possession and skipped back to his car. Meanwhile, my team was examining the contents downloaded from the laptop. Their task was significantly simplified by the scarcity of passwords and the surprisingly easy access to all areas. We focused on bank records and uncovered a series of transactions spanning several years, progressively increasing in both amount and frequency. It became evident that our target was diverting substantial sums of money through fraudulent which passed through the system because of his approval. Our next objective was to trace the money trail. Initially, payments were directed to a bank account under the guise of a phantom contractor, naturally controlled by the company's boss. The account maintained only a nominal balance, indicating funds were being redirected elsewhere to evade detection. By deciphering codes from the downloaded files, we managed to uncover some of the accounts where money had been concealed. These accounts were dispersed across various countries under different names. It was time to enlist the expertise of Tim Delaney, the lawyer who successfully handled my compensation case. He was still with the same firm and had been promoted to partner since our last encounter. He appeared pleased to see me and was eagerly anticipating the opportunity to pursue legal action against my former boss. After days of intense meetings with regulatory authorities and law enforcement agencies, we concluded that it was necessary for the police to immediately press charges of embezzlement and to seek immediate incarceration without bail to prevent the defendant from fleeing the country. On the day James Seward was arrested, I received a visitor at the transportation company office. Steve, there's a Mrs. Seward waiting for you at the reception desk. The young receptionist informed me. All right, send her in. I anticipated that this encounter would be intriguing. The woman who entered my temporary office, in fact, the boss's office, which I had taken over in his absence, was stunning. She was blonde, well-built, impeccably dressed, and exuded elegance. Extending her hand for a handshake, she sat gracefully in a visitor's chair opposite my desk after a surprisingly firm grip. Mr. Hammond, I am James Seward's spouse. Yes, I had gathered as much. How may I assist you, Mrs. Seward? I am aware that you played a role in my husband's imprisonment. That may be overstating it, Mrs. Seward. We have evidence indicating that your husband unlawfully diverted significant sums of money from his own company, jeopardizing its future. Due to the risk of flight, he has been detained pending trial. So effectively, Mrs. Seward, it is your husband's actions that have led to his imprisonment, not mine. What knowledge do you have about the company's ownership, Mr. Hammond? Only what is documented in the corporate records. There are 2 shares, held individually by you and your husband. But you already know about this. Why are you asking? Mr. Hammond, if I told you my maiden name, you'd recognize my family. We were one of the first investors in this company, and have given a lot of money to help it grow, mostly through loans secured by my family. Even though there are 2 shareholders, like you said, my family has provided all the money for the company. If the company fails, my husband might lose 1 share he got at the start. He did a good job managing the company at first, and I still believe in him. The situation was getting more complicated. When we looked into the company's structure, we saw lots of loans from one investor, but we didn't realize it was Seward's wife until now. Mrs. Seward, I sighed. Without intending any disrespect to your husband, our investigations suggest that he has not been entirely honest with you. This will be taken into account by the court in the upcoming weeks. We've already taken legal action to prevent him from accessing any part of the company's affairs. Additionally, we've reassured the staff that the organization is likely to trade its way out of its financial difficulties. Our findings indicate that it should be operating profitably, and its current precarious state is the result of illicit activity, details of which I cannot disclose. However, I assure you that we won't leave until we're confident in securing its future, or, if necessary, liquidating its assets. The refined lady nodded, rose from her seat, thanked me, and gracefully exited the office, leaving a hint of her perfume lingering in the air. By the time the court convened, we had all the necessary evidence lined up. We not only understood how Seward had moved funds using a fictitious contractor, but also precisely where and when those funds were transferred. His motives remained a mystery, as none of the embezzled funds seemed to have been spent. In the courtroom, our lawyer, Tim Delaney, systematically dismantled Seward's defense. Initially, Seward attempted to evade direct questions, evidently unaware of the extent of our gathered information. What he didn't know was that Tim Delaney had security cameras in place, a detail he hadn't mentioned since their installation. When Seward was brought back to the witness stand, he struggled to respond to a barrage of financial inquiries before Delaney abruptly changed direction. Mr. Seward, he began innocently, are you acquainted with a Mrs. Diane Hammond? Yes, he replied, visibly pale. Could you please elaborate on your relationship with Mrs. Hammond? Certainly, she is the spouse of one of my former drivers. We would occasionally meet at company gatherings. Is there anything else you wish to disclose about your association with Mrs. Hammond? Feeling unsettled and increasingly frustrated by Tim Delaney's probing, he replied, I have no personal relationship with Mrs. Hammond. As I mentioned, she is the wife of a former employee who is currently involved in investigating my company. Have you ever engaged in sexual activity with Mrs. Hammond? Absolutely not, he responded immediately. Your Honor, I request to release this witness for potential recall later and call Mr. Brian Smith to the stand. A burly individual, approximately 40 years old and carrying a bit more weight than advisable, casually approached the witness stand and was duly sworn in. Mr. Smith, could you please state your full name and occupation for the court? Ryan James Smith, and I work as a security consultant with ABC Security. Could you please inform the court of the task I assigned you on April 19th, 2 years ago? I was tasked with installing 5 security cameras in the residence owned by Mr. and Mrs. Steve Hammond. Are these cameras still operational, Mr. Smith? Yes, sir. Their footage is automatically transferred to our servers every 24 hours. Who is responsible for monitoring these surveillance recordings, Mr. Smith? Up until yesterday, when you requested to see them, nobody had reviewed them. With the court's permission, I'd like to present 5 photographs. Can I continue? The judge said yes, giving permission. Delaney dramatically gave the first photo to the witness, who looked at it without showing much emotion. Can you tell us who's in this photo, and where it was taken? Sure, the man in the photo is James Seward, the defendant. I don't know the woman in the photo, but she's sitting in the audience. He pointed out Diane, who was trying to hide in her seat. Can you tell the court what they were doing in the photo? They were having sexual intercourse. Yes, sir, Your Honor. I have 4 additional photographs taken at separate times over recent weeks from the security cameras in the home, which I'd like to submit to the court as evidence. I also have an affidavit from Mr. Smith confirming the authenticity of the photos and the placement of the security cameras. Your Honor, I would like to request that Mr. Seward be recalled to the stand. The individual had received a thorough beating, a fact he acknowledged. He averted his gaze to the floor as further questions were posed, eventually conceding to committing perjury. Once the proceedings with Seward concluded, the court adjourned until the following day. Upon reconvening the next day, the judge swiftly addressed the matter, finding Seward guilty of embezzlement amounting to millions of dollars, as well as perjury. The judge also made note of the potential charges related to Seward's inappropriate relationship with an employee's spouse. Sentencing was postponed for several weeks, leaving us content with the outcome of our efforts. With information obtained regarding overseas financial institutions and account details, the majority of the funds were recoverable. Meeting with Phil, George, Jock, and other senior staff at the transport terminal was a genuine pleasure, as we assured them that the missing funds had been located, outstanding debts settled, and the courts had granted permission for normal trading activities to resume. Phil was poised to assume the CEO position, and with the support of his dedicated team, the company was expected to thrive once again. Ownership now rested firmly with Seward's wife, who had proven to be a steadfast supporter during their hardships. A few days later, during a dinner with Tim Delaney, Diane approached our table. I rose to greet her and extended an invitation to join us. Since we had just placed our orders, I promptly signaled a waiter to take Diane's drink and meal preferences. She appeared visibly uncomfortable in our company, and Tim Delaney also didn't seem thrilled about her being there. I apologize for intruding on your privacy like this, she started. But when I found out that you had made dinner reservations here, I realized that it was long overdue for us to have a conversation. So here I am. What's on your mind, Diane? By now, you must know that James and I had plans to leave the country together and start a new life abroad. James kept hinting that he would soon have the means to support our life together, but he never disclosed how. I was stunned when the company went bankrupt, as I believed it was thriving, and I was even more shocked in court to learn that my partner, sorry Steve, but he's been my partner for many years, was planning to fund our life together by embezzling from his own company. This isn't really the appropriate time or place for us to have this conversation, I began, indicating a discomforted Tim Delaney. Perhaps we could discuss this another time. No need for a conversation, Steve. I made a big mistake by not valuing your love, and even worse, I thought our relationship was serious when I knew James was still with his wife. Maybe I was just a secret to him when we first got together while you were away, but I started to believe I loved him. He must have felt something for me too, seeing how much money he hid over the years, but that's not why I'm here. You gave me divorce papers a while ago, Steve, and I have to face that our marriage won't work out. Here's the divorce petition, Steve. I signed it, no strings attached. You're free from me now. We'll need to talk about the house, but I won't ask for anything more since I messed up our relationship. Thanks for inviting me to dinner, but suddenly I'm not hungry anymore. Good night. She rose hastily, attempting to conceal the tears welling up, and hurried away. Well, that was unexpected, I remarked with a smile to Tim Delaney. Now perhaps we can enjoy our dinner. About a month later, the court reconvened for the sentencing hearing, so Tim Delaney and I opted to attend. To our surprise, Diane was also in the gallery, dressed conservatively in a business suit and looking stunning. The sentencing was brief. The judge recited the charges and the guilty verdicts, handing down extensive jail time for each offense. The total amounted to over 20 years, but with time served, as he glanced up and caught my eye, observing the relieved expression on my face, he mouthed something that might have been, "Screw you," but I was content. The conniving man who stole my wife while I toiled away driving trucks across the country was finally facing consequences. In just 3 months, he lost everything: his secret money, his wife, his business, and his girlfriend. As he was taken away to start his punishment, I gave him a big smile. Then I saw his soon-to-be ex-wife in the audience. She smiled at me as we passed each other near the door. "Want to grab lunch?" she asked. I followed her, hearing everything, while my ex-wife Diane stood nearby, shocked. "Sure," I said with a smile. Diane looked surprised and turned away quickly. The woman took my arm, and we walked to a calm restaurant near the courthouse. After enduring years of anguish, embarrassment, and disappointment, I finally felt optimistic about what the future might bring. Second story, I can't get over it. My BF of 8 years was sexting another woman. It all started in September, he says. She looks like a model, nice body, curvy, big boobs, big butt, has everything a man could desire. She's definitely much more attractive than me. I asked him if we were okay because I felt like things weren't right. He would snap at me, saying I'm being crazy and making assumptions, or he'd smirk and say, you don't even know what you're talking about. I just say okay. Days go by, and I see him slowly removing our couple pictures from Instagram, and I notice he's following another girl. I remove her, but the next day, she's back. I ask him if he's okay, and he acts clueless like he always does. I tell him I removed that girl. Why did you follow her again? He pretends not to know, and tries to make me doubt myself, saying, what? No, baby, it's been like that. I'm sorry. I'll unfollow her if you want. I start to distance myself from him as he's been distant to me, feeling uncertain and worried. Eventually, he breaks up with me because he can't handle how emotional and distant I've become. He chooses her while still telling me sweet things without any real feeling behind them, trying to have sex with me while talking to another woman daily, telling her how special she is, how he's never met someone so perfect, someone that could keep up with him. He's never had someone be so nice and caring, looking up how to send sexy dick pics to her. Sexting at work, he said she would spread her lips and ass cheeks open on camera that she wanted to come and visit him weekly to fuck him. Lying to her, saying that we aren't together but we live together and that I'm crazy not to believe anything I say. And for some reason females like that always listen. She said so herself that she doesn't care that it's wrong. Maybe they are a perfect match. She has a lot of male followers. She really made him feel special and he fell into lust because she was so fast and easy with sending him sexual stuff. She was taking too long, telling him over and over that she's going to see him, and when he would make her upset she would tell him, now you have to wait, let's see how good you are. He ended up sexting her friend and says that was the end of it. My soul can't rest. Thanks for joining us on this chapter of Relation Tales. If you were moved by these stories, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Don't miss out on the upcoming emotional roller coaster of relationships. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to share more compelling tales with you. Until next time, remember, every relationship has a story worth telling. See you soon. Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe. Relation Tales. In the early morning, sunlight filled the hospital room where 3 women were keeping watch over a man lying in bed. He was once strong, but now he looked weak and sick because of cancer. One woman, who looked to be in her late 40s and had curly hair, held the man's hand close to her face. Next to her was a younger version of her, probably in her late 20s. On the other side of the bed was a tall, attractive blonde woman who resembled the man. She was gently wiping her father's bald head. Their quiet time was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. A tall, blonde man peeked in and asked if the man in bed was awake, calling the woman sis. He whispered to the blonde, "Not right now, Tim," replied Angie. "He's only awake for short amounts of time. The morphine keeps putting him to sleep." "Molly," he said gently, turning to the older brunette. "May we come in?" She looked up at him, smiled weakly, and nodded. He stepped back and opened the door. A very attractive woman in her early 50s sheepishly entered the room. Her long hair was a heavy mixture of blonde and silver streaks that flowed loosely about her shoulders. Even at her age, she still had a body women 20 years younger envied. "Molly," she softly greeted. "Gwen, please come in." Angie stood up and looked over at Molly. Molly smiled reassuringly and nodded. The young blonde turned back to the guest. "I guess you can sit here, Mom." "Thank you, Angie." What ensued was a human chest match. Each move by one of the human chest pieces caused a move by another piece. Each advancement toward the king resulted in a defensive counter move to protect him. Finally, the room settled. Gwen now sat on the other side of the bed from Molly and her daughter, Jessica. Angie had moved to a chair in one corner while Tim sat in the other corner chair. When the kids told me Joe was going to spend whatever time was left at home, I had to ask to see him. "It was the right thing to do," Molly replied wearily. "I talked it over with Joe, and he agreed. He doesn't want any visitors once we get him home later today, so I'm glad you were able to make it here before he's released." He softly groaned as his eyes slowly opened. Eyes that hadn't looked into each other for over a decade now became locked. "Gwen," he croaked softly. "I'm here, Joe," she whispered. "Where's Molly?" "I'm right here, honey," his wife said gently, patting his hand. He smiled weakly, gazing into his wife's soft brown eyes. Looking around the room, he took note of everyone there. "We are gathered here today," he said, smirking as he heard several chuckles. Closing his eyes, he sighed deeply. He coughed a bit and looked at his ex-wife. "All right, Gwen," he said quietly. "Go ahead and say what you want. I might drift off. I'm having trouble staying awake." "I get it, Joe," Gwen replied. "I'll make it short. And if you fall asleep, it's okay. Most of what I need to say is for our kids, anyway." He nodded, and she took a deep breath. "Joe, I just wanted to say goodbye. Already said that 10 years ago." "Yes," she said with a slight tremor in her voice. "I remember. But when I heard you were dying, I knew I still had some things I needed to say to you. Forgive me," she intensely whispered. "Please, Joe, tell me you forgive me." They stared at each other silently for a minute before Joe sighed. "You're forgiven," he said softly. Gwen sat back, obviously surprised by his response. "Just like that?" she questioned. He snorted. "No, not just like that. Took years to say that and mean it. Molly was key." He winced in pain and let out a muffled groan. Reaching over, he pushed the button on his morphine drip. Within seconds, his breathing deepened and his face visibly relaxed. Minutes later, he was asleep. "I'm sorry, Gwen," Molly said gently. "He'll be out for a while. I know it probably wasn't what you hoped it would be." Gwen shook her head. "Actually, it was more than I dared hope for. I could only dream of him saying he forgave me. I know I have you to thank for that." "No," Molly said gently, shaking her head. "I could never talk Joe into doing something he truly doesn't want to do. Oh, I know he'll do things for me he prefers not to, but never something he didn't feel was right. While I'm still thankful he found someone like you after I lost his love." "You didn't lose his love, Mother," Angie spat. "You threw it away." "I know, Angie," Gwen replied sadly, "and that's something I'll regret for the rest of my life." "You have regrets too, don't you?" Angie snorted and then sat quietly, lips pursed tightly, looking as if she'd sucked on a lemon. "Sweetheart, we all have regrets. Things we wished we hadn't done or things we'd hoped would have turned out differently. Some of those things we had no control over while others we brought upon ourselves. My greatest regret is that I allowed myself to go insane during those months." "Don't try to excuse," Angie snapped. "No, I didn't say I wasn't responsible for my actions. Only that my thinking was severely messed up during that time. There were a lot of things happening back then. Things I doubt either you or Tim were aware of. I know neither your father nor I ever told you details of everything that happened. Joe chose not to do that because he felt I cheated him and not you two since you were both already out of the house. I never told you about it because it would have made you hate me even more than you already do. I don't hate you, Mother." Angie spoke sternly. "I hate what you did, not you. But I won't stay quiet while anyone tries to lessen the harm your cheating caused." "Angie, Tim, please understand. I never realized how much pain my actions would cause," replied their mom. Tim, sitting calmly, asked, "How could you not know, Mom? Cheating on Dad would obviously hurt him. Our family meant everything to him." Their mom nodded. "You're right. I didn't realize what I was doing was wrong. But I ignored the possible consequences. When I did think about it, I knew I was putting my marriage in danger. Unfortunately, that realization didn't come until I was already in the affair. By then, it was far too late. During the divorce, everyone asked me why I'd done such a horrible thing. I wish I would have had a better explanation other than the pathetic excuses I came up with back then. I've had 10 years to dissect my actions, and I believe I now have a better idea of what happened. This isn't an excuse," she said, staring coldly at her daughter. "Just an explanation of how it happened. Up until now I've never wanted to admit the reasons because they make me look as selfish and shallow as I was. Simply stated, several things happened at the same time that presented me the opportunity to cheat on Joe, and I arrogantly and foolishly walked right into it." "Gwen," Molly said gently, "you're a very beautiful woman. I'm sure you had many opportunities to break your marriage vows over all the years you two were married." Gwen smiled weakly at her ex-husband's wife. "Thank you. And you're right, I had lots of opportunities, but not like this." Joe had started traveling again after he'd accepted a large contract. I knew he took it to help pay for Angie and Tim's college, and we discussed it and were in agreement. It was only for 6 months, but it affected me worse than I'd ever dreamed it would. When he traveled earlier in our marriage, I'd had the kids there to help me deal with it. With both of them in college, I was by myself. I felt so old and alone. Then at work, a handsome younger man began pursuing me. I knew Douglas was just in it for the sex, but having a good-looking, rising corporate star giving you attention is flattering. Angie snorted as Tim's pained look of disappointment was written plainly on his face. Gwen quickly continued. "Like I said," she said calmly as she looked at her children, "I was arrogant and selfish. I know it doesn't excuse what I did, but hopefully you'll see how I allowed it to happen. I want you to know it was never anything that your father did or didn't do. It was my fears and then my ego that opened the door. I never stopped loving him, even during the affair." "How can you say that, Mother?" Angie sneered. "You were sleeping with another man. I know you don't believe it, but it's true. The problem wasn't that I didn't love your father because I did. The problem was I loved myself more. During that time I put my needs and wants ahead of the family and your father's needs. For 4 months, I used my unhappiness to justify my cheating my marriage vows. When I finally came to my senses, I broke off the affair. But the seeds of destruction had already been planted. I'd hoped I could live with it and spare your father the pain of finding out his wife was a cheating 304. I knew there was a good chance he'd divorce me if he ever found out. Then why tell him, Mom? Tim said sadly. Was it just to ease your own guilt? Angie interjected. No, sweetheart. That wasn't the only reason. Yes, my guilt was eating me alive. I knew your father could tell things were different after that contract. That year after my affair, things between us were so tense at times. I realized then sooner or later I was going to have to confess to him. However, fate stepped in to make it sooner than I'd hoped. When I broke off the affair with Douglas, I knew neither of us wanted anyone to know about it. He actually had more to lose than I did. He was married to the daughter of one of our board of directors and was our corporation star project manager. He was on course to be our youngest corporate vice president. So when I ended the affair, I made one stipulation: he wasn't ever to have contact with Joe or work on any project with him. My corporation had contracted with your father's company several times in the past, and I couldn't bear the thought of Joe answering to Douglas. Douglas would always have the secret knowledge he'd slept with me, and he might have somehow held that over your father. I couldn't take the chance he'd disrespect Joe. It might seem silly, right? After I had treated your father badly for those months. Douglas agreed, of course. Things looked like they might be okay if I could just stop feeling guilty. But then that government contract came up. It could have been worth millions, and I knew Douglas would be in charge of any GSA project if we wanted it. I also knew Joe's company would be heavily involved. After we won the bid, my fears came true. It was announced that Joe would be leading the engineering team, which was crucial for the project. And, of course, he would be answering to the project manager, Douglas. I confronted Douglas and reminded him about our agreement, but he told me business was business and refused to step aside. I don't think he believed I'd go through with my threat. He was wrong. Gwen paused and took a deep breath. The tears streaming down her face attested to the pain the memories caused. Your father handled my confession like I expected he would. He sat stoically and listened, asking several clarifying questions. I could see him gathering the information he needed before making a decision. When I saw a tear begin to run down his cheek, I knew it would end badly for us. The next day he removed himself from the team. I'm not sure if he was trying to do the right thing and protect his company's interests, or if he guessed what would happen when he stepped down. Either way, it couldn't have been better for your father, because everything went wrong. He was a really important part of that team, so when he tried to leave, it got everyone's attention, even the important people in both our companies. When they started asking questions, their helpers started looking for answers. It didn't take them long to find out about Douglas and my affair. That's when the bad dreams I'd been having for the past year turned into reality. Just like I thought, money was more important than Douglas's position, and he got taken off the project. But it turned out well for Joe and his company. The shame of the situation made my bosses offer more money to his company, and he got promoted. Douglas and I didn't do so well. Why would you have expected to? Tim commented coldly. I didn't, sweetheart, Gwen said softly. Not even back then. The shame of her confession was etched in her usually pretty face. It was obvious she'd carried this burden for many years. What I could never imagine was how bad things were about to get. Douglas and I both tried to find other employment only to find we were effectively blacklisted. Apparently Douglas' father-in-law took his family and daughter's embarrassment very personal. Douglas ended up getting assigned to every nasty project in some of the worst third-world countries. After spending several years jumping from one armpit of the world to the next, he finally gave up. He gave his wife her divorce and crawled away with nothing. Last I heard, he was selling insurance in Detroit. Since he was a couple levels above me on the corporate ladder, he was still considered one of my supervisors. I know the company feared a lawsuit, so they promoted me. They promoted me right back into some office that never sees the light of day. I guess I shouldn't complain. The money is decent, but my career is essentially over. She paused and looked into the eyes of each individual in the room as if she was trying to assess how they were receiving her confession. Jessica had a pinched look on her face as she was obviously annoyed to hear how her stepfather had been cheated. Molly looked concerned and guarded. It was easy to tell she already knew most of this. It was Tim and Angie's looks that caused her to falter. The hurt and disappointment in their eyes seemed like it was more than she could bear. Slowly she gathered herself and continued. If I'd thought things were bad at work, then what was happening at home was a living hell. My marriage was collapsing, and there wasn't anything I could do to stop it. Joe sat down and talked to me a few times after he filed for divorce. I apologized until I was blue in the face. I told him that none of it was his fault, that it was me who destroyed our wonderful marriage. He said it couldn't have been too wonderful if it wasn't enough to keep me out of Douglas' bed. That hurt. I understood why he was bitter and why he'd said it, but it still hurt. Joe then asked me why I'd cheated. My answer was just a string of excuses. After that, he broke off all communication with me. At first, I was angry and frustrated. I was mad at myself for bringing all this down on us, and I was frustrated at Joe for not trying to help save the marriage. "Oh, please, Mother," Angie scolded. Angie asked Gwen if she would have forgiven Daddy and fought for their marriage if he had cheated on her. Gwen shook her head slowly and sadly, saying they both knew the answer to that. She admitted she would have been much more angry and would have wanted to hurt him more than he did to her. Then Angie, Gwen's daughter, said she was just disappointed, not that she didn't understand why her father reacted the way he did. She didn't blame him. She was angry because she saw their 20-year marriage falling apart. She knew she had caused it to end, but she was frustrated that she couldn't stop it. Only Joe, her ex-husband, could have saved it, but he chose not to. Gwen realized that if he really wanted to make her suffer, he would have taken her back. There were several small gasps. "You've always had a way with words, haven't you, Mother?" Angie sneered. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "Angie," she said with tears beginning to fill her eyes. "What did you mean, Mom?" Tim asked gently from behind her. "I would have done anything to show your father how sorry I was for destroying us. I would have degraded myself in ways that would have shamed an old Tijuana 304 if he could have somehow found a way to love me again. But I knew the night I told him about my affair that it would never happen. Even through my tears, I could see how deeply I'd wounded the man I claimed to love. I swear I saw his love for me die right there in front of me. Our marriage was over right then. I saw it in his eyes. He had to move on, Mom," Tim said softly. "We all did." "Yes, I know. I also know I'm still having some difficulties doing that. You kids have been a great help to me in those areas. Oh, I know you were angry with me at first. No, furious was more like it. You had every right to be, but you didn't abandon me. I'm not sure I could have survived that. I'm thankful Joe didn't turn you against me. Dad would have never done that," Tim stated calmly. "No," Gwen said, shaking her head. "No, that wouldn't have been him." She smiled sadly at her son and then turned towards Molly. "Did you know I prayed that somehow, some way I could get my marriage back? I begged and pleaded with God to somehow change Joe's heart and mind and give me another chance. I know I didn't deserve it, but it's what I wanted. I held on to that dream for over a year. Then Angie told me he'd started seriously dating you, Molly. That was when I knew my prayers weren't going to be answered. It wasn't until after you and Joe got married that I seriously tried to get on with my life. I started dating again, and that was when I found out just what kind of a marriage I'd had before I destroyed it. We'd had something very good, but I'd forgotten how special it was. But I was reminded when I started dating again. Boy, how I was reminded. I dated quite a bit, but it never failed. I'd start comparing them to Joe, and it wouldn't last too long after that. There's a special kind of intimacy between lovers that only comes with time. Only someone who's made love to you many times before knows when you want to be taken forcefully with a raw passion, or when just gentle caresses and a soft kiss will send you over the edge. You can't imagine how humbling it is to realize just because you crave your lover to know those things that won't happen. It's not because he's not willing, but because he doesn't know you and your body well enough to know what brings you the most satisfaction at that moment. My nightmare was realizing I was the reason those things were gone. Because of my actions, every romantic relationship I now had was forced to start from scratch. Oh, there were a few relationships that seemed to be promising over the years. 2 of them even ended in proposals, but I turned both of them down. "Why?" Molly asked with concern written on her face. "Report. Why didn't I accept?" Gwen sighed deeply. "Well, that's a bit complicated. One reason was I was still in love with my ex-husband." "Mother," Angie scolded Gwen once more. "No," Gwen snapped back at her. "You can't tell me something I already know very well. There's nothing you can say that I haven't heard or told myself countless times. None of you can dictate how I feel. I love your father, and that won't ever change. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'll always feel guilty for what I did. I'm trying to learn to live with those feelings and move forward. In some ways, I've made progress, but in other ways, I'm still struggling." "Angie, sweetheart," Molly said softly, trying to calm the situation. "It's okay. I'm not jealous. I know how much your daddy loves me." Gwen flinched slightly. "I know that as well, Molly," Gwen continued, steadying herself. "That's why I felt like I could make that statement. I know you will forever have his love. I admit I'm jealous of that, but it was my own doing. Please, I don't want anyone to think my feelings for Joe were the reason I turned down those marriage proposals. It's much deeper than that. Just like everyone in here, I questioned that if I really loved my husband like I said I did, how could I cheat him like that? I wish I had an answer I could live with. So I compared my love for my would-be suitors to my love for Joe. And since my feelings for each of them wasn't as strong as my feelings for him, I had a problem. If I couldn't stay faithful to Joe, how could I promise either of them my fidelity? I cared enough about them to turn each one down. At that time, it was the right thing to do, since it wouldn't have been fair to them. I'm sorry, Molly gently spoke. I'm sorry you're going through that. Gwen smiled sadly. It's easy to see why Joe fell in love with you, Molly, she said sadly. You're beautiful on both the inside and outside. Thank you, but please, Molly said, her face pinched with concern. Please don't make me out to be some kind of saint. I have my own regrets, Gwen. Most concern my first marriage, but one in particular is related to Joe. Mom, and along Jessica questioned. No, it wasn't something terrible, but it is something I'm ashamed of. Since Gwen has been so brave when talking about her regrets, I'll try to follow suit. It happened a few months after Joe and I had started dating. Our dates have been quite hot and heavy, but we hadn't them. Well, we weren't. Molly paused. Her face contorted as she struggled to find the appropriate words. Having sex, Jessica said, smiling. You mean bumping uglies? Angie added, snickering. Hiding the sausage, doing king. Girls, Molly gasped. Knocking boots, Jessica howled. Hitting it. Making babies. Girls, Molly barked, her face bright red. Tim laughed along with the girls as Gwen quietly tried to hide her pained expression. What I was going to say, Molly said, trying to regain her composure, was that Joe and I hadn't yet been intimate. I knew it had been a while for him, well, both of us, and the sexual tension between us was complicating everything. Then I heard a phone call. It was clear that Molly was starting to feel uneasy. She took a deep breath and kept talking. She heard Joe talking to someone. At first, she thought it was Angie, but now she's not sure who it was. But whoever it was, Joe was talking about possibly getting back together with Gwen. Molly knew she loved Joe, but she was still scared because of her first marriage's failure. Even though her first husband had left them 9 years ago, she had never let another man get as close to her as Joe did. She knew he was a good man, and he would be a good father and husband. So I decided that he was mine. That week I shamelessly threw myself at him in an attempt to claim him and keep him solely focused on me. In short, I seduced him. Mom, Jessica said, smiling. I seriously doubt it took much seduction to get Dad's attention. I mean, damn. Every time I saw you two, you were always touching each other. Seriously, Molly, Angie added. Daddy could never seem to keep his hands off of you. Your father has always been very affectionate. Molly replied. Jessica snorted while Angie and Tim smiled. Is affectionate another word for horny? Jessica grinned. Jess, Molly scolded. The 3 adult kids laughed. Gwen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Mom, Jessica said, still smiling. I can't see why you'd regret showing the man you love how much you desired him. Sweetheart, I don't regret that. What I regret was it took the fear of losing him to bring me to that point. I also wonder what would have happened if I hadn't done that. Would Joe have waited on me? Would he have gone back to Gwen? Whatever would have happened, I would have hoped he was happy. I know I've been more than satisfied with the life we've shared. Molly, Tim said gently. Dad always says you and Jess saved him. Molly nodded and softly laughed. I know he does, she said warmly, but the truth is he saved us as well. After my ex took off, I had some real trust issues. I dated off and on again for almost 10 years, but those issues were always in the way. I had trouble believing any man would want me for something other than just sex. Then Joe shattered those misconceptions. Well, Jess chuckled as she looked at her grinning stepsister. What? Her confusion clearly written on her face. Sure, Dad wanted you for more than just sex. Of course he did, honey. Oh my. Tim, Angie and Jess laughed as they watched Molly's face turn bright red again. Jessica Patterson, you behave, she replied, fighting back a shy smile. Your father's love has been so much more than just that. He's a good man and a great father. Even when he first got sick, he was still looking out for us. I couldn't have prayed for a better, more loving husband. He's made these last 8 years happier than I'd ever thought possible. I never realized Joe ever seriously considered reconciling with me, Gwen stated softly. I wonder who he would have been talking to about something so personal. Well, since this is apparently Jerry Springer Family Confession Day, Angie stated sarcastically. That was probably me. Daddy and I had several conversations concerning that. I didn't realize you were so involved with his decisions back then, Molly said gently. Angie sighed, looked over it just then back to Molly. More than you can probably guess as well, Angie said calmly. I knew Daddy was at a crossroads back then, whether to live in the past or to move forward. He told he was falling in love with you, Molly, and if he didn't break it off, then he'd probably ask you to marry him. He said he still had feelings for Mom though. He told me you can't be married to someone for that long and not still have some feelings for them. I asked him about those feelings. He told me where once they had been almost purely loved, now they were a mixture of love and hate, anger and bitterness, weariness and despair. He was struggling on whether to go back and try to work out those feelings or to start fresh. Naturally, since I'd been trying to set him up with Molly, I pushed him that way. You tried to set him up with other women. Gwen said sadly. I didn't realize you hated me that much. Mom, like I said before, I don't hate you. But what happened wasn't about you. It was about Daddy. I saw how your affair hurt him. It almost destroyed him. On the outside, he might have seemed strong and calm, but inside, he was hurting badly. I stayed with him that summer after you told him about your affair. It was about a month after you confessed, and everything was falling apart. I can't count how many nights I went up to his room to check on him and heard him cry. He wouldn't cry in front of me, but when he was alone in his room, he let out his pain. I'd sit quietly outside his door in the hallway and cry with him. Tears filled Gwen's eyes as she slowly shook her head. I never knew, she said quietly. I knew I'd hurt him, but I never saw any signs of his pain other than his occasional angry outbursts. That's because he never wanted you to see it. He didn't want you to have the satisfaction of knowing how badly you'd wounded him. I never meant to hurt him like that. I was selfish and totally focused on what I wanted and needed, but I didn't maliciously try to hurt your father. Whether you did it intentionally or just through your stupidity isn't really important. Mom, the fact was you did it. So when he was faced with the choice of going back to a wife who'd cheated on him and poisoned years of good memories, or starting again with a woman who loved him and would never cheat on him, I pushed for the latter. We all know it would have taken months or years of working through the trust issues just to get to a level he could begin to relax and be happy again with you, Mom. So hell yes, I pushed for him to start fresh with Molly. I do regret manipulating him a little, and I even sort of feel bad that I had a hand in making sure you two didn't get back together. But to be honest, Mother, this wasn't about you anymore. This was about my father's happiness, and I believed and still believe he was happier with Molly than going back and trying to wade through all the bullshit of rebuilding his marriage with you. Angie, I didn't realize you had played matchmaker so well. Molly interjected gently. I'm torn slightly between scolding you and hugging you and thanking you. Well, Jessica interjected. She didn't do it quite alone. I've got my own confession to add to all this. Jess, Molly asked in surprise. Mom, you know I met Angie in college. She was an upperclassman who was tutoring me my first year. We became friends, and it didn't hurt that she had a cute younger brother a couple years older than me. She looked at Tim and sadly smiled before turning back to her mother. I was still living at home and Angie came over several times. I could tell she was watching you very closely. When I confronted her about it, she shared her thoughts that you and her father would be perfect together. I was going to move on to campus the next year and was worried about you being left alone. I guess that was when we conspired to find a way to get you two together to see if there was any chemistry. I'd gone out with Tim a couple of times before Angie invited me to stay the weekend at their house. When I first met Dad, Joe, I fell in love with him immediately. Angie snorted a laugh. She fell for him almost as quickly as you did, Molly. Angie snickered. Bullshit, Jessica snapped, smiling. I fell for him at least a full week faster than my mother did. It took her that long to pull her head out of her but accept the fact she loved him too. Jess, language, Molly stated firmly before allowing a small grin to escape. Jessica playfully stuck her tongue out at her mother and smiled innocently. Anyway, since I was hooked, we began planning on how to get you two together. Angie came up with the idea of inviting both of you and I for a weekend visit. I'm sorry to say the story we used to cover our plan was that I was really into Tim and wanted my mom to meet him. Jessica turned to Tim. I'm sorry, Tim. I guess I never really said sorry to you for making you think I was more serious about us than I actually was. You were a great guy when we were dating, and I was obviously very interested in you, but you weren't in love with me. I know, Tim interrupted. I couldn't understand what was happening at first. I knew I cared more about you than you did about me, but that first visit to my home was surprising. Then, after seeing you with my dad, I was even more confused. I won't lie, it hurt my ego when my girlfriend seemed more interested in my dad than me. But after your next visit with your mom, I finally got it. Until then, I was worried I'd fallen for a girl with some serious daddy issues. Well, Jessica laughed. I guess in a way I did. I don't know too many 19-year-olds who changed their last name when their mother remarries. Even though we never lived under the same roof, he's been more of a father than any other man ever has. Well, Tim grinned. After seeing your mom and watching Dad's reaction to her, and you, it was very obvious. I'd forgotten how long it had been since I'd seen him smile and laugh like that. The silent room was filled with both reminiscent smiles and troublesome regrets. Well, Tim said quietly, since everyone else has confessed to some deep dark secret, I guess it's my turn. With all eyes turned to him, Tim cleared his throat. I just wanted to let you all know that you'll probably read something in the papers next week that might upset you. And yes, it's true. I am a lost Kardashian sister and I've recently become engaged to Caitlyn Marie Jenner. Hey ho, Angie snorted. The room filled with sporadic laughter, a stark contrast to the earlier mood. Just like his father, both Gwen and Molly said simultaneously. The two women stared at each other in surprise before Tim interjected again. Thank you, he said, smiling warmly. I can't think of a better compliment. The room slowly drained of the small chuckles and settled into an uneasy quietness before Gwen gracefully stood up. Molly, she said with a small sad smile, thank you again for allowing me to come here today. I'm still trying to move on. This meeting was a big step for me. Thank you for letting it happen. You're very welcome, Gwen, and I hope you are able to go on and have a wonderful life. This was mainly Joe's decision even though we both felt some good could come from this. If he hadn't, I wouldn't have agreed to it. I won't let anyone hurt my husband. I wish, Gwen whispered, I wish I'd been that passionately loyal. She looked over at her son. Tim, would you drive me to my hotel? He nodded and gathered his things. Gwen looked back at the fragile man sleeping in the bed. Molly, please tell Joe hi's in my prayers. So are you and Jessica. I will, and thank you. Gwen turned and slowly walked out of the room. Once safely on the other side of the door, the tears began to stream down her face, and she quietly sobbed. She realized that was the last time she'd see the love of her life alive. 2.5 weeks later, Joseph Randall Patterson, aged 53, passed away. He died peacefully in his sleep at home, with his loving family by his side. The graveside service was both sad and comforting. Molly sat between Jessica and Angie in the front row, while Gwen surprised some by sitting in the front row between Angie and Tim. After the service, friends and family offered their condolences before heading to the family reception. Now, all three adult children surrounded Molly as they stood by the limos. Molly, Angie said gently, I want to thank you again. I never thought I'd see Daddy smile again after the divorce, but you brought that back into his life. You reminded him he could love again, and there was no doubt he loved you both. Molly reached over and gently took her hand. Never forget how much he loved you and Tim. He was always so proud of you too. We know, Tim said, smiling sadly, but divorces make it hard on everyone. Even though Angie and I had already left home, their divorce was hard on us. We wanted to be there for Dad because he was so hurt and angry, but we weren't able to be there every day. We are so grateful he found you, Angie, and I also want to thank you for how you treated Mom these last few weeks. You've allowed her to say goodbye to Dad and be a part of celebrating his life today. Not a lot of people would have allowed an ex-spouse to do that. Oh honey, your dad and I knew it was important to Angie, and you, as well as your mother. It means more than you know, Angie added softly. When Daddy fell in love with you, he was able to move on with his life, but Mom never really has. Hopefully you and Daddy allowing her to say goodbye will help. Molly, not only did you give my daddy a new life, you might have allowed my mom to do the same. Your father and I love you both so. Molly started to say before her voice cracked, I love you both. Molly tried to hold back a sob as she leaned against the limo. Tears started flowing down her cheeks. I'm really going to miss him, she cried. Tim stepped up and hugged her tightly as she buried her face in his chest and cried. The two younger women hugged each other as they watched Molly grieve for her lost love. Slowly, Molly calmed down, and the group turned their attention to a woman kneeling by the gravesite. She was lost in her own world, quietly crying as she touched the cold marble headstone and whispered to her husband. Angie and Tim silently walked over and stood beside their mother. Mama, Angie whispered gently. It's time to go. She's sitting next to me. Sorry for the forenet in advance, y'all. Well shit, I what to do right now, lol. So I've been with the woman for like 8 months and she's been staying with me most of the time. I mean clothes, toothbrush, all that. A few days ago, a guy who I knew as her ex texted me, asking if I was dating her. I replied, yeah, what's up? He started talking about how she hurt him and how she's playing everyone. I didn't tell him to go away, but I asked him to show me proof. He had some weak evidence, easily debunkable. So then I told him he needed better proof, but he made excuses about his bad tech and wanted to meet in person. That sounded dumb to me, so instead I said I'd wait and act like he didn't say anything. No need to stress over a loser. A day went by and he still didn't provide proof. So I told him, dude, I'm not getting angry. Stop harassing us. But he keeps insisting she's no good, claiming she says we're not together and that they've been sleeping together. He's like I got footage but was scared to show off his young ... So I called him like, dude, I watch porn, I'm not looking at your dick. So he sent me security cam footage from a camera in his room. It's still images, but it's her for sure from 5 days ago lol. Yay, why Reddit is my first outlet Ike. But lol, it isn't Ike what to do suggestions. I'm not trying to cause a suicide here, just I don't even know, just someone needs to know lol. Edit, I'm not really beat up about it cause like signs were there that I just ignored but kept on file. So I kinda already figured as much, just didn't have proof and didn't want to be the insecure asshole womp womp. Thanks for joining us on this chapter of Relation Tales. If you were moved by these stories, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Don't miss out on the upcoming emotional roller coaster of relationships. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to share more compelling tales with you. Until next time, remember, every relationship has a story worth telling. See you soon. Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe. Relation Tales. What a great start to Friday. I felt really happy about the love I got. Last night, I lay on my back with a pillow under my head. After some enjoyable moments, my spouse Jeanette and I spent 2 hours making love. Jeanette acted more confidently, and we got intimate. After we finished, we felt peaceful and happy together. Life feels amazing right now. I won't talk about anything else until Monday. Do you ever worry that people might feel jealous when they hear how happy you are? Something along those lines. Well, in that case, see you on Monday as well. This made me chuckle and shake my head. This is how our Friday started. We both took a leave on Friday and Jeanette took an additional day off on Monday. My holiday was concluding, so we returned on Sunday night, allowing me to begin work on Monday. We were off to the mountains for a weekend of skiing. Jeanette's friend Tatiana and her husband Steve rented a place with us 5 miles away from the ski lodge. We did the same trip with them last year. Another couple was going to join us on Saturday. Tatiana was Jeanette's bridesmaid, and Jeanette was hers when they got married, which happened about a month and a half apart. Steve was a typical high school athlete who talks a lot about his past sports achievements. I could probably match most of his home runs, game-winning shots, and touchdown throws. Interestingly, both Jeanette and Tatiana were into sports in high school, playing volleyball and basketball. They're both tall and slim, probably because they've listened to Steve more than I have. Tatiana just looks blankly at Steve when he tells his stories. It's not that I was absent from school sports. I was the lead quarterback for the junior team for 3 consecutive years. High school students weren't permitted to play on the junior varsity team, so I focused on college. Although Steve holds a college degree, I would never employ him. In truth, all 4 of us have pursued higher education. I still have to complete my thesis. This might postpone things. According to my advisor, I should aim for something around 6 pages. I've drafted an outline, but it's going to be a challenge. This is likely how it's supposed to be. Having a master's degree signifies something to potential employers. Don't forget to pack your golf club so we can make space for the groceries. Yeah, sure. Need anything else, so just get it done. I went to the garage, and as the garage door opened, a light shone beneath my car. Since I did the oil change the day before, I decided to inspect it. I unfolded the tarp, spread it out on the concrete, and knelt down. Noticing a few droplets under the oil pan, I touched them and immediately knew it was oil. How hard is it to ensure the oil drain plug is firmly secured? Evidently harder than I assumed. Sliding out from under the vehicle, I took my socket set and got within reach. Indeed, the bolt needed tightening by about half a turn. Now it feels secure. Oh darn, I forgot the paper towel after a final back and forth. The issue was resolved. I stored the tarp and headed inside to cleanse my hands. Ready to leave almost, just need to wash my face first. What trouble have you got into? They didn't fasten the oil pan bolt properly. They may be inexpensive, but we should check their work. Quick or we'll be late. Right away. So this earned me a sharp glance complete with tightened lips. We encountered Tatiana and Steve at the supermarket near our cabin, if you consider 10 miles nearby. It seemed like we planned to stay for a month with 2 fully loaded shopping carts. While opening the trunk, I spotted my golf clubs. Darn, Dale, I thought I asked you to remove them. The rear seat was cluttered with sleeping bags and suitcases, surrounded by an assortment of snacks. Only a handful of bags could fit in the rear of the vehicle. Jeanette remained quiet during the final part of the journey to the cabin. Upon arriving at the cabin, we started unloading the vehicles. I began with the rear seat of our car. After a few trips, Tatiana and I went back to the vehicles. We bypassed Jeanette and Steve, our arms laden. Tatiana took the final grocery bag from the automobile. I listened to the rear of the car, close with a thud. I lagged slightly behind Tatiana as she walked over to my car. The back of my car was open, and 2 bags were still inside. In the distance, we heard a really loud noise. Tatiana and I looked towards the mountain and saw a small avalanche starting. I've seen this happen 2 times before. It usually lasts about 10 seconds and then stops. But this time was different. What looked like a small avalanche at first now seemed much bigger, stretching out for hundreds of feet. The noise it made sounded like a train coming closer. Oh no, it was heading towards us in the car. I quickly closed the back of the car, then jumped into the driver's seat, and Tatiana got into the passenger seat. The noise getting closer was really scary. We both stared in dismay as the snowy slope neared. I buried my face in the steering wheel. Tatiana drew her knees up and coiled into a fetal position. The collision propelled my car like a puck on ice. Moments later, we hit something solid. It felt like merely seconds, but I was petrified. Suddenly Tatiana screamed, reminiscent of a teenager descending the first drop of a roller coaster. It felt as though my chest would burst, my heartbeat undoubtedly soaring past 100. A headache ensued. It was pitch black. Alive. Are you okay, Tatiana? I believe so. My head hurts a bit, and we seem to be at an angle, she replied. Indeed, your side is elevated compared to mine. I found the switch and turned it on. Let there be light, I declared. You have blood right above your right eye, Tatiana observed with concern. Check me. Nice hair, gentle smile. What precisely am I inspecting? Chuckling, I realized I wasn't bleeding, at least not visibly. I gave Tatiana a wink and she blushed. We remained silent for a while. I attempted to open the door, but we were firmly wedged in. A vast, snowless patch was noticeable beside the front right tire. The illumination was poor, but it appeared to be under a canopy formed by massive trees. If we could access this gap, we'd have sufficient oxygen to last a few days, provided we run the fan to disperse the carbon dioxide. After all, it's the CO2 that poses a lethal threat, not the scarcity of oxygen. Did you bring the last grocery bag? I inquired. Tatiana negatively shook her head, pondering whether Steve and Jeanette made it. Uncertain. I've never witnessed the impact of an avalanche this magnitude on structures. My heart dropped at the thought of Jeanette not making it. My eyes watered and I brushed away tears, noticing Tatiana did the same. Seems we haven't exactly survived yet, have we? Not until we inhaled some sunlight-warmed air, I mused, wondering if anyone would realize we were trapped. I honked the horn. Fortunately, it functioned, providing us a means to alert rescuers. We resolved to honk every hour or upon hearing any signs of life. After a lengthy silence, Tatiana voiced, I don't wish to perish. Agreed. I hadn't anticipated today to be my final day. I concurred. Despite the lack of phone service, I decided to pen down messages to express my affection for my loved ones. What a splendid idea. It's unfortunate I don't have my mobile with me. I'd do the same. You can borrow my phone. I had been typing for roughly 10 minutes before emotions overwhelmed me and I passed the phone to Tatiana. She felt the same emotions. For the next 2 hours we took turns with the phone, each of us composing several messages from the beyond. We didn't hear anything back. The battery held up fine and we switched off the car's interior light to rest. I'm feeling a bit chilly, Tatiana mentioned, concerned. It's unfortunate we didn't clear out the trunk earlier. The sleeping bags were left on the back seat. There's a method to access the trunk by folding down the back seats. I have winter gloves and a waterproof jacket. I believe I also have wind cheaters. Getting into the back seat, I searched for the release lever. It worked. Using my phone's flashlight, I peered into the trunk. A minute later, we had donned gloves, hats, jackets, and waterproofs. Moreover, I fetched the last 2 bags of food. Crunchy celery sticks, frozen cauliflower, and crisps were the main attractions. We weren't going to go hungry. Recalling I had a couple of energy beverages in my golf bag, I retrieved them from the trunk. I couldn't stop myself from laughing upon seeing Tatiana dressed in golfer attire. Warmer, right? It does help. May I offer you a celery stick? If it's all right, I'll make an exception for you. I settled back in the rear seat and donned the remaining golf outfit. Tatiana leaned the front passenger seat back as far as possible. We wished we had a blanket. Then Tatiana said, Hey, I've got these small towels I use for wiping my clubs. We can cover our faces with them. We might also use the floor mats. It's not perfect, but it could help a bit. So, that's exactly what we did. Each of us took a towel, put it over ourselves, and covered our faces. It helped us feel better. We closed our eyes and rested. When I woke up, I realized I had been asleep for 2 hours. Tatiana was snoring in a manner often attributed to women. Instead of disturbing her, I remained lying there, pondering my existence and our current dilemma. I don't wish to perish. Will they locate us before the spring melt? Are we actually going to die just an hour before rescue? My mother will be in anguish. I hope Jeanette is safe. Startled, Tatiana awoke and screamed, It's all right, Tatiana. I'm here. It was a horrifying dream, Dale. I envisioned our skeletons inside the car. I don't want to die without asking. I moved to the back seat. Her warmth was comforting, I can't deny that. What's the time now? It's just past 7 p.m. The sun has been down for nearly 2 hours. That explains why it's colder. Are we going to die of starvation? Or suffocate? I think we're safe from everything but the cold. I could really use some water. Turning the ignition, I found the driver's side window wouldn't open. Both passenger windows did, a few inches each. I checked if they would close again, then lowered them once more. We took this chance to eat some snow for hydration. With a bit of effort, we managed to make a small opening into the night air, securing a ventilation source. After running the car's fan for 10 minutes, I raised the windows once more. With our car horn blaring continuously, I hoped someone might investigate the noise. Tatiana voiced the very thought I had. I need to use the bathroom. Me as well, I responded. It seemed the car was leaning towards the front left tire. I'm going to drive. Don't you dare look, you creep. Wait, should I grab the camera for a video? You'll suffer if you try that. The car was soon filled with the sounds and odors of urine. Tatiana returned to her seat and I took my spot in the driver's seat, relieved myself, then started the car, lowering the windows. With the windows down, I turned on the fan. After lamenting our situation, we tried to get comfortable for the night. After about 30 minutes of silence, Tatiana inquired, "Will you be okay? Do you need me to do that?" What I desire and what I must do at this moment are entirely different. I believe you should hold me, so you don't accuse me of bothering you all night. Tatiana moved to the back seat, leaned against it and pulled me close. Move closer to me, I'm feeling cold. After wrapping us in blankets, Tatiana put her hand on my chest, pulling me closer. Her warmth made me feel really comfortable. If her hand had moved lower, I would have felt uneasy. With our faces covered by bath towels, I'm not sure how long we slept, but then Tatiana moved me aside and rolled away. I saw Tatiana getting into the driver's seat, and the car started smelling like urine again. When I looked at the clock, it was almost 5 a.m. Tatiana hugged me again, and neither of us wanted to fall asleep. What will you do if Jeanette passes away? The question confused me. Are you going to leave or stay? If Steve has passed, I'd like to go back to my parents' house until I've moved past the sorrow. How long do we have? Roughly a week, I replied with a laugh. We have sufficient water and probably enough provisions for another 3 or 4 days. It's uncertain if we have adequate air. Given this is a main road, I'm hopeful we're being searched for. I cuddled closer to Tatiana once more. Her hands slipped beneath my shirt. The sensation of skin against skin was soothing. We spent hours conversing about various topics and nothing in particular. After consuming a few crisps and finishing the celery, we settled in and soon drifted off to sleep. Upon awakening, I stayed still while Tatiana softly snored. Checking my watch, it was nearing 5 p.m. Suddenly, a muted bang barely perceptible. Tatiana, I heard something. I began signaling also as 3 short beeps, 3 long, then 3 short again. Tatiana murmured gently, "Please, please." After a moment of silence, we both detected a tapping sound. I signaled SOAS once more, then exclaimed, "Eureka!" Research pole landed squarely on the vehicle. I blared the horn continuously, until the pole made contact with the car again. Even with the certainty of rescue, the delay intensified my anxiety. Why is it taking so long? Tatiana nestled against me as I stretched over to the driver's seat. Occasionally another search pole would strike the vehicle. Then, voices emerged. Almost there. Hold on. The clash of metal was never more welcome. I sounded the horn once again as the beam from a headlamp pierced the snow. An elder rescuer, fully cloaked, smiled at us. He removed snow from the driver's door. I attempted to open it, but snow obstructed it. After a few more minutes of digging, the door started to open. The noise of a shovel against the door was followed by the door swinging open a few inches. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's nothing," he replied, assisting Tatiana and then myself out. Outside, darkness enveloped us. Around 20 individuals with illuminated helmets greeted us. They wrapped us in blankets, handed us water, and secured us to a sled. Is the dwelling still upright? Which dwelling? My heart dropped. We were at 24,269 Pine Way. A couple resides there. He relayed my information over his radio. Following a brief discussion, he returned to us. The house wasn't located. It's too dim now, but we'll return at dawn. Let's transport you both to the hospital encased in snow for 15 feet. Your car horn alerted us this afternoon, hence we extended our search into the night. Ready? Tatiana raised me, wrapping her arms around my torso, and we were conveyed to an ambulance. A warm journey. Later we arrived at the emergency department, attracting considerable attention. I received 2 stitches for a cut above my right eyebrow, marking the extent of our injuries. Fortunately, there was no indication of severe hypothermia. Despite this, we remained in the hospital overnight, rehydrating and gradually restoring our body temperatures. Tatiana was discharged first in the morning, yet she awaited my release. I conversed with the paramedics. They stumbled upon a shack where indications of existence were apparent. I lifted Tatiana. Spinning her around, she bent forward, planting a kiss on my cheek. For what? Because you embody a true gentleman. Your serenity astounded me. I'm unsure if I could have managed on my own. With Steve, the situation would be entirely different. He'd be utterly bewildered. So heartfelt thanks, you're welcome, and my gratitude to you as well. Your composure was only beneficial to me. Who's accountable for the rescue? I discovered this individual in the diner. Oh, I believe a control hub was established there. Let's head there. The ensuing 2 hours were grueling without any updates from the rescue team. Around 12:30, the coordinator relayed news 2 had survived. The deployment of heavy machinery was necessary as the walls had given way. They were fortunate to find refuge in a section not entirely razed. Any idea when we might reach them? You'll make it. But it's too early to guess what will happen next. I felt dizzy for a moment, but both of them were okay. Please, make sure the bulldozers don't cause any more damage. Then, after a while, we got an update. They both came out safely and would arrive in 30 minutes. Tears filled my eyes, and Tatiana and I hugged again. I used up all my phone battery telling my family what happened. None of them knew about the avalanche during our skiing trip. Now, everyone was excited. When we saw Jeanette on a stretcher, and Tatiana did the same with Steve, we all cried tears of joy. We were allowed to visit them after lunch, and we spent the first moments hugging them tightly and saying sweet words. Hello, dear, how was your weekend? We got plenty of snow here. And yours? Yes, spotted a few snowflakes. Her laughter was melodious, her kisses comforting, and her embraces heavenly. Tatiana and I barely made it to my vehicle before the calamity struck. How did you two pull through merely by chance? A thunderous noise was followed by turmoil. We were organizing the kitchen when disaster hit. I believed my end had come. But as the commotion ceased, I realized I was alive. Darkness enveloped us and I could detect Steve's murmurs. We had about 3 feet of clearance and remained motionless for what seemed like our luck. Indeed, were there provisions or blankets, a handful of apples, and a mat were all we had on the floor. The thought of perishing from hunger, if not from cold first, crossed our minds. Our only warmth came from Parker's, and a mat, any harm uncovered in minor cuts and abrasions. While Steve severely sprained his ankle. How long will your stay be? At the least, overnight. Our core temperatures are alarmingly low, one medic mentioned. Surviving another night would have been improbable. After bestowing affection on Jeanette, visitors were directed to depart. Secure a restful night. I'll return home, fetch your automobile and bring fresh attire. Jeanette signaled agreement, then nearly in distress, implored, Dale, just leave them. I wish not to be reminded of this ordeal. I'll dispose of them. Her hands clutched at the bag I held. Truly, Jeanette, it's no issue. You won't recall these as your garments. Everything's almost new. I get it, Dale. Just hand them over, please. Rest now. See you at dawn, Dale. Hand over this damned bag, Jeanette. You're agitated. Rest well. See you in the morning. I believe if she had the strength to stand, she would confront me fiercely. Oddly, as I awaited Tatiana's arrival, the elevator indeed brought her to the main floor. He's like a big toddler, I tell you, absolutely intolerant of anything unforeseen. And Jeanette, I reckon she's quite all right. She became upset when I mentioned I was taking her garments home, preferring to discard them herself too. People react differently. It's peculiarly fragile. It seems she didn't wish for me to witness. Do you concur? And you, did I leave your attire? No, everything's accounted for in this bag. May I? Tatiana peered sternly, their expressions transformed. Instantaneously, her gaze turning fierce. What folly possessed him? They're exceedingly stubborn. It's more than a singular incident here. I'll confront him. Tatiana abandoned her belongings and proceeded towards the staircase, the door shutting with a bang. I was left in shock. How could she behave so? She didn't resemble someone who had suffered an assault. I collapsed into the chair, heart shattered and vision blurred as anger began to swell within me. Moments later, security escorted Tatiana back to the entrance hall. A guard, maintaining a distance, cautioned her to conduct herself properly, or face expulsion. I feared the worst. He didn't specify the frequency. A few, he said. We pondered over my life. What on earth? I desired to lash out. Never have I felt such fury. After a brief silence, tears streamed down her face. The phone indicated an Uber's imminent arrival in 2 minutes. You may accompany me. I'll escort you home, she offered amid sobs. It was an inconvenient time, painful for both. Upon reaching her residence, Tatiana affectionately pecked my cheek. Stay strong, Dale. You too, Tatiana. Thank you for a great weekend, she said with a smile, even though she had tears in her eyes. You made this trip special. The ride home felt sad, and I couldn't stop thinking about what to do. Should I blame her, hug her, leave her, forgive her, or look for Anne? After finishing some important tasks and grabbing a quick meal, I went to my office. I told my coworkers about what happened over the weekend, and they gave me the next day off. While going through Jeanette's clothes, I picked out sweatpants and a matching top. Suddenly, I felt angry. Last Halloween, she wore a dancer's costume that I found hidden among her lace clothes. This is what she needed. Since her drawers were open, I decided to move her things to the sleeping area in the office so she could rearrange freely. I planned to turn the sofa back into our bed, so I gathered her obvious feminine items and put them aside with her clothes. It required some time to muster the courage to visit Jeanette's chamber. Her family showered her with affection. Jeanette's eyes were puffy from weeping. After embracing and kissing my family members, I focused on Jeanette, mourning. The urge to throttle her evolved into a gentle hug. Is this all for me? She nodded in affirmation, aware of my knowledge. Her bottom lip quivered. Will you be discharged today? I believe so, I replied. The treatments and warmth have helped despite the unpalatable food of which I can't get enough. Jeanette felt uncomfortable, unable to meet my gaze. I'll grab some coffee. Would you like anything? I'll accompany you off of Jeanette's father, Fred. Upon reaching the cafeteria, he scrutinized me. What's the matter, Bale? I assumed you both were deeply in love, especially after such an ordeal. Fred, I need to clarify that things at home aren't as serene as presumed. I'll allow Jeanette to share her perspective. It's distressing I'm at a loss. We carried a tray filled with coffee cups and pastries into the room. Jeanette dried her eyes after we finished the treats. Fred led his group out before Jeanette, and I had a chance to speak. Her doctor entered and instructed her to prepare herself as she was about to be discharged. Jeanette grabbed the bag of clothing I had brought for her and headed to the restroom. It was a quick change. Do you want me to wear this? It seemed as though you expected a dress code agreement. We had decided to refrain from intimacy until the following Monday. Indeed, we had made several promises that were shattered by unforeseen events. Her expression twisted in pain and she retreated into the restroom, where she wept for nearly half an hour. Jeanette was wearing that outfit when she emerged, her voice shaky. Are you satisfied now? Far from it, I replied. A nurse appeared with a wheelchair, her expression one of true surprise. I went to bring the car to the front as everyone's gaze followed Jeanette to the passenger side. I chose not to assist her into the car. Our journey was quiet for the first few minutes. We pondered over my life's turmoil and realized it hadn't destroyed us, though it brought tears to her eyes once more. Silence ensued. What will happen next? Your belongings are in the office. She wept softly for the remainder of the trip. Upon arriving at the house, she mustered some bravery and whispered, I'm feeling terrible. So am I confessed. My vehicle was a wreck and I started the insurance claim process. Driving the rental car home, I acknowledged that being with Jeanette wasn't what I desired. I texted her, don't wait up, I won't be home. Her reply came swiftly, please come back, Dale. We can't resolve anything without communication. I spent the evening at a sports bar, absorbed in college basketball and NHL games, seemingly exuding a vibe unique to betrayed spouses. Hours later, the server inquired if I was dealing, cautioning that alcohol wouldn't solve my issues. Yes, I concurred. Jeanette was waiting as I stumbled home around 1:30 a.m. I was concerned about you, she said. My response was vague, and I resisted her attempts to embrace me. I shut the bedroom door and leapt into bed. In the morning, Jeanette left a note stating she had gone to work and that she loved me. I couldn't stay home, haunted by happy memories that only stoked my anger. I arrived at work by noon and stayed until 9. Will you be home tonight? Dinner is also ready, she texted. I got home around 10 p.m., knowing I had work early the next morning and couldn't risk a hangover. For the first time since Monday, Jeanette wasn't in tears, sitting on the sofa in her sweatpants. We need to discuss things. Please don't shut me out, she pleaded. What's there to discuss? You thought so you acted recklessly, I retorted. You don't understand, she protested. Then enlighten me. How are Tatiana and your conversation about death different from our situation? I questioned. Her eyes welled up with tears again. We weren't considering ourselves, our focus was on you guys, assuming you were probably gone. Let's not argue tonight, she suggested. It wasn't like that, I countered, feeling weak and scared. Are you considering divorce? She asked. I don't desire to end our marriage. I truly don't understand. I feel chills when I'm close to you. The agony of being betrayed is overwhelming. May I just embrace you? As I opened my arms, Jeanette hurried to press against me. Her cries lingered for several moments before we stepped back from the hug. Good night, Jeanette. See you tomorrow. Good night, Dale. I cherish you. This was my first encounter with treachery. Had I experienced this in high school or college, I might have grasped that life goes on. At the moment, I was uncertain. I was baffled by how purported love could transition to desire. For the next few weeks we resided in a dead-end street. It's unfortunate I don't possess Anne's contact details. Is she really leaving Steve? If yes, does she plan to move out? Have you spoken to Tatiana? Not since she unexpectedly visited my room on Monday. I've decided not to reach out to her ever again. She was quite unpleasant. Her words were harsh. She complimented your noble behavior and heroism. She mentioned that you were informed about everything. That's why I was upset when you arrived. Did you inform your parents? Fred instantly had suspicions. Not exactly. I was hopeful we could navigate through this situation. But it seems improbable now, doesn't it? I believed our passion was intense, but you extinguished it. I just don't feel comfortable around you. Something in me has withered. Let's wait until next month. Then I'll make a decision. Jeanette looked like she was going to cry. I felt really down. For weeks, I didn't feel much and stayed emotionally numb next to Jeanette. Jeanette, what's going to happen to us? Can you give me one good reason why we shouldn't break up, because it seems like you've given up on us? I messed up, and I'll always be sorry, but I didn't mean to. It just happened. I believe nothing happens by chance. It happened because you let it. Jeanette looked really upset. That's not true, she said angrily. As far as I know, you and Tatiana were together, trying to stay calm. So what are you trying to do? All right, how long have you two been intimate? I bet reuniting with Steve felt good, didn't it? This might have been Steve's first instance, but I'm curious how many others there have been. Jeanette hugged her legs and curled up. My allegations felt like physical blows to her. Did you use our home or just hotels? Regardless, you succeeded in keeping me oblivious. There you go. Are you pleased now? Sorry, Dale. I shouldn't have spoken those words. There were no others. It was an awful choice made in a difficult moment. Please, can we look beyond this single incident? One thing is certain. Jeanette, you've determined our end. I sought a partner who could withstand temptation. I realize you'll always see me as deceptive, and I'll forever worry whether you'll find another scenario to be unfaithful. This isn't the life I envisioned for myself. I'm too young for such burdens. I'm proceeding with a divorce. Oh my God. No, please, Dale. I don't wish to lose you, Jeanette. It's time for me to move forward. My body doesn't react the same way when you're near. All that's left is sorrow. You couldn't have hurt me more deeply. I will instruct my attorney to initiate the divorce proceedings. You will receive the notification. There's no need for public disclosure. Jeanette's eyes brimmed with tears and her voice broke. I'm genuinely scared. I won't contest it. What will become of our home? I believe we should sell it. Neither of us desires it, and I doubt you can manage it financially, with a subdued reply. Okay. 2 days later, Jeanette received the divorce papers at home. This was equitable since we had little to divide. I will be required to provide a minimal amount of child support for 2 years. As the divorce went uncontested, it was finalized in under 90 days. Jeanette did her utmost to sway my feelings, but I remained unaffected, perhaps by choice. I relocated shortly after I handed in my papers, as anticipated, because Jeanette was unable to cover the mortgage payments. Consequently, the house was sold and the small remainder was split equally. Initially, Jeanette moved back with her parents. She relocated again a few months later, but her new address is unknown to me. Thoughts of her stir up feelings of anger and sorrow. The idea of getting back at Steve crossed my mind, yet I concluded it wasn't worthwhile. If it means avoiding trouble, then I'm inclined to steer clear of it. My perspective on retaliation shifted during the divorce proceedings. Meanwhile, several of my long-standing friends tried their best to introduce me to single women, though my emotional state was numb. Despite going on a handful of dates, the prospect of entering a new relationship felt unappealing. Is this what my future holds? 5 months after the ordeal, having attended exclusive job fairs, I was presented with 2 appealing job proposals. As much as I was fond of my present job, it simply couldn't match these opportunities. When I discussed my options with them, I accepted a position on the West Coast, close to Palo Alto. My belongings neatly fit into my car, and my new flat felt just as isolated as the last one, which was hardly an improvement. I acknowledged the need for a romantic life, yet I was unsure about my desires from life. One evening, as I revisited the text messages I had drafted, it brought warmth to my heart. Expressing your love and appreciation to those important to you felt rewarding. I resolved to embrace the single lifestyle. It felt as if I were eavesdropping or perusing someone else's journal as I went through the messages that Tatiana had crafted. Her creative flair was notably superior. Reading her note to my mum made my heart race. I might not have ended up with the ideal man, but at least I'd leave this world in his embrace. I felt compelled to reach out to Tatiana, but Jeanette's contact was no longer in service. Nonetheless, I figured it would be unkind to ask her for this favor. Recalling my conversations with Tatiana during our wait for help, I believed I knew where her parents resided. Among the items I collected was a photo album from our wedding and a newsletter which revealed Tatiana's maiden name. Tracking down her parents was straightforward, and I left a message for her mother to contact me. Dale, is it really you? How have you been? Oh, Dale, hearing from you is such a relief. I've missed you terribly. I'm doing wonderfully. What's new with you? I've obtained my master's degree and secured a job on the West Coast. I've been here only a month. Is Jeanette with you? No, I couldn't move past it. We've been divorced for a few months now. How about you? Are you still with Steve? No, I'm in the same situation as you. We lived together for a little bit, but it was too hard for me. I'm really happy you called. What made you do it? Last week, I was feeling down and came across the songs we wrote together. Reading them cheered me up. I had totally forgotten about them. Oh, I guess you read mine too, about the man of my dreams. Huh. I didn't realize she was such a close friend. True friends don't share secrets like that. So, where are you now? Are you still in Chicago, or did you move to the West Coast? And we have an office in San Jose. How far is it? Palo Alto is roughly a 20-minute drive from San Jose, the airport I usually use. Perhaps I can persuade my boss to let me visit our San Jose office, or maybe I should consider a trip to the Windy City. Really, Dale, it would be wonderful to see you. I have no plans this weekend. I know where the airport is, so I can pick you up. How about we look for flights for Friday night? Could you find me accommodation? Sure. I'll see what I can arrange. Well, you know, I didn't want any trouble with your guys. I'll handle them. Are you sure your friends will let you go? Just like you, I will handle them if things get tough. I'll bring a few with me. Great idea. They can keep my friends entertained while you and I play checkers. I appreciate your humor, Tatiana, and that's just one of the many things I adore about you. We spoke for more than 90 minutes. It was so nice to hear her voice again. So many wonderful memories came rushing back. It took all my effort not to think about Jeanette, but I succeeded. On Friday, I went to work early and left around 11 a.m., heading to Chicago. I messaged Tatiana that I was on my way to a passenger pickup area. Dale, here I picked Tatiana up and spun her around as we hugged. I received the warmest kiss this year. Glad you could make it. Hungry? Yes, I suppose I should eat. Take me to your favorite spot. Let's go. Do you want to drive? Not really. You can drive just in case you need to stop for a break. Laughing, can you believe what we had to go through? I've thought about this moment so many times. After a lovely dinner at the Texas Roadhouse, Tatiana drove us back to the highway. My heart slowed a bit as she pulled into the Holiday Inn parking lot. Usually my out-of-town guests stay here, but I have other plans for us, she said with a twinkle in her eye. It won't hurt, right? Only if you struggle, I won't give in easily. As soon as we arrived at Tatiana's apartment, she jumped into my arms. Gentle kisses led to passionate ones. Our hands explored, albeit more slowly than Tatiana's. We gently helped each other undress. Tatiana pulled my face to her chest. That night, we experienced a great deal of joy. Everything moved fast since we hadn't been with partners for a while. The first round led to a second and a third. We couldn't get enough of each other, sharing delight. We fell asleep content, and after a bit of rest we expressed our love for each other again. I heard the shower running as the sunlight warmed my face. Standing there without clothes and drying her hair with a towel, Tatiana greeted me. Good morning, my love. Did you enjoy last night? Was it a dream or reality? I experienced both. You lasted much longer in my dream. I stuck my tongue out at her. Get up, lazy bones. We have a whole day ahead. It was a marvelous weekend. I must have reached the peak 10 times. On Sunday evening, we said goodbye, having previously agreed that Tatiana would fly to San Jose in 2 weeks. When it was time for the fun to end, I realized I was falling for Tatiana. Her expression when we parted suggested she might feel the same. I got a confirmation message in the middle of the week. Good evening, Tatiana. How's your job going this week? Very well, Dale. That's the reason I'm calling. There's a vacancy in their San Jose branch. I checked and I'm eligible. I really like you a lot, but if you don't feel the same way, I'll back off. And if I tell you I think I'm starting to love you, would that help you decide? Yes, that would help. So, will you think about changing your mind cleverly? Yes, I will. I love you, and I'm agreeing to this. We talked for many hours. My job was to find us a good place to live near her work, the airport, and my job. Once she got the job, she packed her bags. It's only been 6 weeks since she contacted me again. Sometimes life moves really fast, like an avalanche. We took our time, and we both harbored deep-seated fears regarding relationships. Though we had our arguments, we invariably managed to share kisses and hugs before sleep. I interact with many young ladies at work, and this causes Tatiana concern. She travels with men, which unsettles me. It was during one of our discussions, 10 months after we began cohabiting, that we reached an understanding. I'm truly sorry, Tatiana. I behaved as if I was in 5th place. If you can remain faithful when situations tempt you with the man of your dreams, then I have no concerns about you traveling. I distrust men, so please steer clear of compromising situations, or 60 years of suffering. I joined the company men, and we had a small wedding in San Jose. Then we went on a honeymoon somewhere warm, far from the cold. We never went skiing again and lost interest in it. Our jobs became our main focus instead of having kids. But after 8 years, we welcomed Sarah into our family. She looks like her mom. 2 years later, her sister Maggie was born, and she's a lot like me, which might be tough for her sometimes. We found out through social media that Steve got married again and has a kid. We also learned that Jeanette moved to Maryland and has 2 kids. Neither Steve nor Jeanette tried to contact us, and we didn't try to contact them either. That part of our relationship was like being buried under an avalanche. Second story, I cheated months ago and she just found out. Was it really cheating? How do I handle the guilt? My girlfriend and I have been dating for about 6 months now. We attend the same college, but we don't live together yet. Before this relationship, I never had anything really serious. I was just casually dating here and there, but then I decided I wanted to commit to someone, and that's what I did. Our relationship was good, but I had a lot of doubts. I wasn't sure if our personalities matched well, and I wasn't sure if I could ever live with her because of this. I started having these doubts after only 2 months, so we hadn't been together long enough for me to be certain. In December, she went on a 19-day trip overseas with her family. We texted almost every day, but we both really value physical touch, so the distance was tough. On New Year's Eve, my ex-girlfriend texted me, asking to get back together. At first, I said no way, but after feeling distant from my girlfriend, I started flirting with my ex. At this time, I was unsure whether or not I wanted to stay with my girlfriend, or try and commit to my ex. My ex and I decided we'd hang out with our good friend just to see if me and her still liked each other. When we did, nothing happened. No kissing, hugging, touching, nothing. I ended up deciding that she still wasn't right for me and blocked her before my girlfriend got back from her trip. I decided to tell my girlfriend some of what happened, but left out that I flirted and how I felt because I was afraid it would hurt her. Me and my girlfriend just took a 6-day trip and stayed together. We had never been better, and I have never been more in love with her. All my questions and concerns had been answered, and I know that she's the one I want to be with. We got back yesterday, and she immediately got a text from my ex-girlfriend telling her everything that had happened in December and January. She showed her texts, photos, and screenshots. My girlfriend texted me immediately, and I was 100% honest with her about what happened. I thought she'd dump me immediately, but she decided that she wants to stay with me and work past this, which I couldn't believe. I feel incredibly guilty because I've hurt her, and I don't think I can ever make it right. I guess everyone has their own idea of what cheating is, but my main question is, did I cheat? I think I did, and that's why I feel so ashamed. I know the distance between me and my girlfriend contributed to this, but I also know it's not an excuse. My second question is, will I ever stop feeling like I'm not good enough anymore? It's only been 12 hours since this happened, but I'm scared I'll never be able to regain her trust. If I could go back and undo it, I would in a heartbeat. Thanks for joining us on this chapter of Relation Tales. If you were moved by these stories, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Don't miss out on the upcoming emotional roller coaster of relationships. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to share more compelling tales with you. Until next time, remember, every relationship has a story worth telling. See you soon.